Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. We're closing out March with a really fun episode. My friend Alex Segura is joining us. And Alex, as you know, works for Archie Comics, used to work for DC, is a great publicity man, also has been editing the Dark Circle line at Archie Comics. And that makes a lot of sense because Alex also has his own job as a novelist, a detective novelist. He's a huge fan of the genre of detective fiction, and has added his own creation to the mix. Pete Fernandez, I guess I relate to Pete because this is a former sports reporter for a newspaper in Miami. As novels have progressed, he is a de facto private detective. Pete has 3 novels. Down the Darkest Street is the latest. It comes out April 11th, but you can start with Silent City, his first novel. You can go back to Bad Beat, which is a Pete Fernandez prequel, through Amazon and your various booksellers. And I'm really happy for Alex because he has been embraced by the detective fiction community. He goes out and goes to crime conventions as much as he does comic book conventions. And it's interesting to hear about not only the building of Pete Fernandez, his Miami haunts, but also I'm really interested in where fandom is as far as detective fiction goes. I know, as I said, they have their own convention circuit. We talk a little bit about that. Reading clubs, podcasts, lots of things. And I would say if you're like me and a fan of detective fiction, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Alex Segura on today's Word Balloon. Brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your support. Man, I even got like another 7 or 8 League of Listener followers, and I want to thank you very much for that because you're helping keep the lights on literally as I am between regular jobs and trying to make ends meet. I really could use your help now more than ever if you've had any interest in the past in subscribing to Word Balloon. It's wordballoon.com. If you click on the Patreon ad there, it will take you to my Patreon page. And if you can spare, I'm asking, is Word Balloon worth the price of one comic book a month? I hope so. I think I provide a lot of entertainment. I know that entertainment lasts a lot longer than the average comic book read. And I think you get insight into the pop culture world when you listen to Word Balloon, not just the comic interviews, but also interviews like today's with Alex. So if you've ever had any interest, go to wordballoon.com, click on that Patreon ad, or go to patreon.com/wordballoon directly, and that's where you can subscribe. Thanks a lot, really. It means a lot, Word Balloon listeners. I truly do appreciate it. Word Balloon is also brought to you by InStock Trades at InStockTrades.com. And pretty interesting, I wanted to see what would happen if I put crime in the search box at InStock Trades. Of course, the Crime Does Not Pay archives came up. These are fantastic books from the golden age of comics. These are usually pre-Comics Code crime stories. Along with EC, it was Lev Gleason's publishing house that put out some of these excellent books. And Dick Wood, Lev Gleason were the writers, and excellent artists like Charles Biro and Dick Briefer, or Briefer, I never know how to say it. Dick Briefer was the Frankenstein Golden Age artist, and Charles Biro did the Golden Age Daredevil. Crime Buster was another one of their characters. But these were true crime comics, really done by master writers and master artists. Really, really neat stuff, and that unfortunately got kind of shit-canned when the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency targeted specifically Crime Does Not Pay, along with the EC horror stuff, as too, graphic and violent for children. But you can get them here. It's published through Dark Horse, and great sales. Mostly all these volumes are 42% off, $28.99. There's a Pistol Whipped Crime Does Not Pay primer collection, but it is also 42% off, $11.59. You can also get Superior Foes of Spider-Man. Interesting, that popped up in crime, probably because Volume 2 is titled Crime Century. Nick Spencer, Steve Lieber, they are together now on the image book The Fix, but you can see where the collaboration started with Superior Foes of Spider-Man. Trade paperback Volume 2 is 42% off, $9.85. Scene of the Crime, the deluxe hardcover edition from Ed Brubaker, Michael Lark, and Sean Phillips. These are tremendous stories about a crime scene photographer And that collection is 45% off. It's $13.24. Have you, I'm sure you've noticed that Rosario Dawson keeps popping up on all the Marvel Netflix TV shows. And I saw her just recently as I'm going through Iron Fist. Her series that was made by the 12-Gauge Shotgun Studio, an excellent crime studio featuring the art of Tony Chastain, David Atchison, and Rosario Dawson all together on Occult Crimes Task Force, Volume 1. It's 45% off, just $8.24. Pretty neat story from Rosario Dawson. You can also get Mean Streets Crime Anthology. This came from IDW and collected 4 crime stories. Easy Way by Christopher Long and Andy Kuhn. The Devil's Concubine by Palle Schmidt. Fishtown by Kevin Colden. And Baja by Ben Wagner and Nathan St. John. Really neat, very cool hard case crime anthology in comic form. 40% off, $17.99. Just some of the great crime books. I just randomly put in crime at In Stock Trades and found a bunch of stuff that if I didn't already own it, I'd probably be buying it. You can too. Great deals and great prices. InStockTrades.com. All right, without further ado, let's talk to Alex Segura about his detective character Pete Fernandez, his Miami haunts, likes and dislikes. You always get to know the detective along with solving the crime. And I think Alex does a really good job of showing Miami in a way that other Miami crime writers haven't. And, in fact, we have on the website at wordballoon.com a walking tour of Pete Fernandez's Miami and also 2 playlists of music to think about when you think about Pete Fernandez. So, Down the Darkest Street, the new book, it is out on April 11th, but we're here to talk about really Pete Fernandez in general with Alex Segura now on Word Balloon. Normally, I talk to this guy about one of his jobs at Archie Comics, but today it's author Alex Segura who puts his hat on to talk about the third novel in his Pete Fernandez detective series. Alex, welcome back to Word Balloon.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. This is very cool. I'm a fan of the podcast, so it's nice to be on as the guest.
No, I appreciate it, man. That's true. Mostly, and forgive me, this is your first time on Word Balloon. In the past, it's always been in the booking an interview capacity with somebody from DC or Archie Comics. But yes, you're in the guest seat now. Yeah,
no, I was a guest, I think a couple years back when we launched Dark Circle, but this is my first time as author.
Forgive me, I forgot about that as well. That you ran, and seriously, you should come back because there have been obviously Dark Circle's gone through a few arcs, and it's very
we've got some more stuff coming up too. So
excellent. But yes, today it's all about detective novels and your character that started in Silent City, Pete Fernandez.
Right.
So yeah, this is the third book, Dangerous Area?
Dangerous Ends, it's the third book, and the series is set in Miami. Silent City is the first novel, and it was reissued last year to coincide with the second book, Down the Darkest Street.
Yep.
And it's the protagonist is a guy named Pete Fernandez, who's, when you meet him in Silent City, he's got a dead-end job in the newspaper industry. He's just come back home to Miami from New Jersey, dealing with the death of his father, and his fiancée has just left him. So he's having kind of a pretty terrible string of luck, and he's also drinking pretty heavily. And what happens then is a coworker comes up to him and says, "Hey, I need your help. You used to be this great investigative journalist. I'd like you to help find my daughter." And in that process, we kind of see him go from, this burnt-out guy to an actual almost proto-private investigator. And we see kind of his origin story. It's basically Pete Fernandez year one, if we're going to use comic terms.
Sure.
And Down the Darkest Street is a much, no pun intended, a much darker sequel. It really drags him down into the darkest parts of his own life. He's dealing with his own battles with alcoholism and trying to figure out a string of murders that are very similar to a serial killer who was plaguing Miami and Florida decades before. The only problem is that guy's dead. He was electrocuted. And so Pete and his partner have to kind of suss out what went wrong there. Dangerous Ends is the third one. And, it's kind of interesting to give little snippets on each book because you don't want to spoil too much of what's going to happen in the series for people that are starting with the first one. But Dangerous Ends is a bit more ambitious, I think. we jump back and forth in time. We go back to kind of Castro's early days in Cuba to meet Pete's grandfather. You jump forward to the present, where Pete has been roped into investigating this crime involving an ex-Miami PD officer who brutally murdered his wife. And so the officer's daughter has hired Pete in the hopes that he finds one shred of evidence and gets her dad exonerated. And as Pete and his partners start to investigate, they get tangled up in this pretty deadly street gang that have ties to pro-Castro groups and are somehow very set against Pete solving this crime.
Excellent. I really enjoyed Silent City, and I haven't had a chance to get to Down the Darkest Street or Dangerous Ends, but I have to say that I'm, like I said, enjoyed the first, and you were kind enough to give me Dangerous Ends to check out. And
yeah, let me know.
Of course I will. But no, it was a great start, and nice to see. I guess your peers in the crime world are being incredibly kind, and that's fantastic. As well deserved. I really enjoyed Silent City, and also you had that book that you co-wrote with another crime writer, and you had a crossover with his detective character.
Yeah, that's true. It's
Bad Blood?
Bad Beat. It's a prequel in many ways. It's a prequel to Silent City. It's set in New Jersey, where Pete is still a sports reporter, and you kind of see him right before he really hits his bottom, right before his dad dies, and he crosses over with his character Ash McKenna, who is written by Rob Hart, and he's in a bunch of great books like New York and City of Rose and South Village. And we're both published by the same company, Polis Books, and so we were having dinner. Now it's a year and change ago, maybe 2 years ago, no, a year ago, and we're talking about comics and how much we love crossovers and, crossovers we read as a kid. And I said, well, it'd be neat if we could do it with our own characters. Why don't, you don't see that in mystery fiction that often. And
Sure.
So we're pretty simpatico in the way we work. So we literally just kind of mapped out the story, talked about the things we wanted to write about. It's about this football player, Raleigh the Gun, who's a college football player who goes missing. And Pete is brought in. Pete, as a sports reporter, is kind of trying to suss out where he is. And Ash McKenna is an old friend of the guy's, so he's trying to find out where his friend is. And so the two detectives, or soon-to-be detectives, bump into each other, and in classic Marvel fashion, they come to blows first and then help each other out. So it was fun. It's a pretty lengthy short story. I could almost say it's a novella, and I find those things to be really cool, to just collaborate with somebody else and really get a sense of the other person's style and work ethic.
No, and it expands the universe a little bit, and it introduces each author's group of readers to the other person, which I think is smart. And these books Go ahead.
What's funny is just as we were writing Bad Beat, I was going over the proofs for the Silent City reprint. And in Silent City, I don't know if you remember this, there's a scene where he interacts with a bartender named Ash in the Keys. And so I just threw in a line. I guess I wasn't going all full George Lucas on it, but I threw in a line mentioning Bad Beat, so kind of to tie it all in. And Rob had Ash McKenna mention Pete in one of his upcoming books. So it's kind of tying in, and also, I guess, canon.
That's fantastic. I don't believe Hammett had anything to do with it, but there was a sequel to The Maltese Falcon on the old radio anthology series Suspense. And at that point, the actor Howard Duff was playing Sam Spade in the old radio series. It's a really great series if you're not aware of it, and I would say that.
Oh no, I haven't heard it. I'll check it out.
It's excellent, and in this one episode of Suspense, it literally is a sequel to The Falcon, and it's called The Candy Tooth, and it's another rare object that Casper Gutman is looking for, and in his in the usual kind of typical detective way, while going down suspects and trying to find information, he gets a call from Philip Marlowe, and it's Robert Montgomery, who played Philip Marlowe in Lady in the Lake. And they have this really phone conversation between Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe, and it's like, yeah, I've run into that guy before, and he kind of gives a little character description to Spade, and it's just kind of this fun little passing moment. And at the time, Duff was not only doing the Suspense episode, but doing the regular Spade radio series. And Montgomery, as I said, had played Marlowe on film and was the narrator of Suspense at that time, so it was kind of an easy crossover. And just a cute nod to both series like that.
Yeah, that's really great. And it's also neat, I mean, from my perspective, to, jam with a writer whose work I like. And it's something I'd like to do soon, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about more stuff like that. But it's interesting, and, as I've got maybe now 3 books under my belt, but at the time it was 2, and so you're kind of picking things up from one of your contemporaries and kind of seeing how they operate, and hopefully vice versa. And it was cool. It was one of those fun little one-offs, and it's always neat to see people mention it, because it does count in my eyes, and I think in Rob's eyes as well.
Sure. And it's nice to see that the crime writing community is very fraternal that way, because I know and I meant to actually have it up while we're talking, but I took it down. Some of the pull quotes that you got from, is it Ace Atkins that took over the Spencer crime novels?
Yeah.
He gave you, I saw he gave you a hell of a nice pull quote, and I certainly admire his work since picking up the Robert Parker series as he has. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, he's done a great job with those, and it's it's such a daunting task to step in for Parker,
Yes.
And really just take on such an iconic series, especially one that has just so much ground to cover. It's not like he wrote 3 books and you can kind of make stuff up from there. And Ace is also a very prolific author of his own stuff, and equally acclaimed and great. And I've been really lucky with those. It's always stressful to ask someone to read your book early, and then what if they don't like it? What if they aren't responsive? But I've been, I've had a lot of luck in that department, and I think some of my own favorite writers have gotten the chance to read my work, which is, it sounds crazy. It's just surreal to me as someone who read their books trying to figure out how to do it myself,
Definitely. One of the go-to sites for me for finding information about crime fiction is thrillingdetective.com. And it's nice to see that Pete Fernandez has a nice little section there, and I think very positive reviews, links to the first 2 books. I'm looking for the name. It's Kevin Burton Smith is the guy that wrote the essay.
I was really blown away to discover that, and it's that almost kind of validates the whole thing. You're not doing it in a vacuum. And I remember going to that site to just find new detective series to read when I was really first starting to get into this stuff. Once you get past the initial, get through the Hammett and the Chandler and Ross McDonald, you start digging around for more stuff, and that website was really helpful.
That's excellent, man. I picked up on detective crime when I was a kid in the very late 70s and early 80s, and Ellery Queen was still being published, the magazine, and I would sometimes... Were
you into the McBain books, like Ed McBain?
Oh, sure.
To ask you that.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. And certainly have come to love, the guys like Pelicanos. I mentioned, we mentioned Parker before, and the Spencer novels and stuff. In building, I want to talk to you about some old time detective stuff. But tell me about building Pete Fernandez and how you set out to create this character, and how things maybe came to you just in passing, or did you have a motive in mind of what kind of detective you wanted to build?
It didn't have. It wasn't like a bolt of lightning. I think growing up, I always wanted to write, and I would always dabble and do things, write poetry, short stories, or, in college, I thought literary fiction was going to be it for me. But for whatever reason, I was still writing. I was working in journalism as a reporter and an editor, and then I got into PR. And I think, we've talked about this a little bit, but when I got to New York to work at DC, comics evolved from my hobby to becoming my job. And so to kind of rest my brain from comics, I started picking up detective novels again, and I started reading, more modern PI novelists like George Pelicanos, who we mentioned, and Dennis Lehane, who everyone knows from Mystic River, but before that he wrote a really acclaimed series of PI novels starring this guy Pat Kenzie and his sometimes girlfriend Angie Gennaro, and Laura Lipman, who writes the Tess Monahan books. And so to me, these were leagues beyond the initial, Chandler and Hammett stuff. Understandably, decades had passed, but they really resonated with me because these characters weren't just, your typical fedora-wearing detective, sitting in their office as the femme fatale walks in. So there's kind of screw-ups. They're maybe not doing it as well as they should be. They're not making the best decisions all the time. And each book was really strong in terms of place. Pelicanos writes so well about D.C. and Lahane and Dorchester and Boston, and the Tess Monahan books are about Baltimore and all its quirks and weird characters. So I got to thinking about doing that myself for, my own hometown. And I think part of it was being homesick too. I think the first year in New York for anyone is a challenge. You have to kind of adapt to everything, the subway, getting around, kind of the masses of people. So, and I was trying to reconnect with Miami in a way, and that's kind of where Pete was born, kind of a synthesis of those books, wanting to reconnect with Miami and also wanting to represent, kind of the Cuban American idea, that, I didn't see a lot of Hispanic protagonists. And it's not like Pete wears it on his sleeve, but it is who he is. It's part of his literal DNA. So
that's cool.
That's kind of his, just how he came together.
His origin. Absolutely, man. No, that's cool. That's fantastic. I also, much like the comics community, I know that, there are crime novel conventions and we've talked about this in the past. It's a shame. Here, I should throw this out there. We recorded an interview, got screwed up. Not that anyone cares, but I know
the origin of our interview.
This is true for the Pete Fernandez interview, at least. Absolutely. Yeah. The recording totally got mucked up last month, so that's why we're redoing this. And so every now and then I might refer to, we talked about this before, and this is what I'm talking about, so the listeners know.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say this one's going better already.
It's true. What's the name of the big convention that's kind of like crime?
VoucherCon.
What? Say it again.
VoucherCon.
VoucherCon. Yes, VoucherCon.
Right.
And it moves from city to city. It's not set like in San Diego, correct?
Yeah, that's what's neat about it. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff about it, but that struck me as a comic book guy, where okay, WonderCon is here, Comic-Con is here, New York Comic-Con's obviously in New York, but VoucherCon hops around. This year or last year it was in New Orleans. This year it's going to be in Toronto, and the following year it's going to be St. Petersburg, Florida. So it's really different seasons or years attract different authors. And in comparison to a Comic-Con, it's a little bit more low key, though. The crime writing community can get crazy in its own way. It's just more. It's a little bit smaller in scale. You're usually in one hotel, and you kind of go to different panels and different ballrooms, and there's a book room where you go and shop for books, and then coincidentally a lot of authors seem to congregate at the hotel bar, and then you end up going to dinner with some friends. I've got maybe like 15 years of Comic-Cons under my belt, so at this point I take it pretty easy in terms of pacing myself and not staying out till 3 a.m. But it's a different vibe, and it's a little bit more relaxed. There's not the insanity. I guess probably because I'm not doing 2 jobs at once. When I'm at a VoucherCon, I can actually walk around and kick back a little bit.
Yeah, just be an author. Absolutely, man. And
exactly, yeah.
So now three books in, and again, as you say, the books are Miami centric. Once Pete gets settled and everything. Good response from the Florida community. Are the Miami papers aware of the series, and do they appreciate the attention to the locales?
Yeah, probably one of the greatest moments for me as a writer was I was on vacation in the Keys, and I got the alert that the first book got reviewed in the Miami Herald, which was my hometown paper growing up.
Yeah.
And I actually worked there for a number of years. And I remember driving to this abandoned Publix and just grabbing a whole stack and just, looking at it and being like, okay, this is happening. This is great. It was a good review, positive review. I think, they've reviewed the first 2 books, and I hope they review the next one, and they seem to like them. And I've done events in Miami at Books and Books, which was, is a great bookstore, continues to be an awesome bookstore in Coral Gables and around Florida. And I did an event last year at Murder on the Beach, which is in Delray, and it's just a mystery bookstore, so that was really neat. And so, I try to hop down there and do a little mini South Florida book tour every year if I can.
Sure. That's cool. What other?
Yeah, stir up the base.
No, well, yeah, absolutely. And I'm wondering what other Florida-based detectives are there? Carl Hyacint's stuff isn't that Florida-based or no?
Yeah. His stuff is set in Florida. James Hall has written a bunch of great mystery novels. There's a bunch. There's a lot of them. That Les Standiford, John Dufresne. I actually, Miami Book Fair is a huge event every year.
Yes.
In November in Miami, and it's a literary kind of. You get every author there basically, and I've gotten to go the last couple of years as an author, which is neat. And last year we did something called Noir at the Bar, and what that is you collect a bunch of writers. They bring a short piece of work. It could be from their novel. It can be a short story. Usually 8 to 10 minutes is what we say. And you take turns reading, but there's never been one in Miami. It's been all over the world. It's been in New York. It's been in, England. It's been in Canada. It's been in L.A. And so part of what I did going down there for book fair was coordinate this Noir at the Bar, and I got to interact with a lot of Miami crime writers, which was huge. A lot of up and comers and a lot of established names, like Vicki Hendricks, who wrote this book called Miami Purity, which is one of the best and most overlooked noir novels. So if you have a second, and if you like Silent City and you want to read something that's, a million times better, you should read Miami Purity. It's just one of my favorite books, hands down, just amazing. So she came out to the event. So I got to introduce her to the audience, which was pretty cool.
That's amazing. And I do know a lot about the Miami Book Fair because much as I'm a comic nerd, I'm a book nerd, so Book TV, C-SPAN's, I think, number 3 channel or second, C-SPAN 2 on the weekends becomes Book TV. And they always have, cameras. It's, really, again, if you're a panel nerd, as I am when it comes to comic conventions and any sort of live presentation where, you've got people talking about a topic in front of an audience, if the Word Balloon listeners aren't aware, really check out Book TV. They have a great archive on the C-SPAN website. Have you had a chance? Have you been on camera on any Miami Expo panels yet, or just Noir at the Bar?
I did the Noir at the Bar. I've done other panels. I did one that same week with 2 other authors, Joe Clifford, who writes the Jay Porter detective series, which is great, and Mike Creedon, who they both went to school down in Miami at FIU, where I went to. So it was kind of a mini reunion, though we didn't know each other at school.
Sure.
And they're both very great. They're great writers. So it was neat to just kind of sit there and talk crime and read from our books. And it's a good audience, very interactive. So that's the fun part of these literary events, is just engaging with the readers and getting a reaction. People saying, "Hey, I read this book and this is what I thought," or "Why did you do this?" So it's not just some kind of fly-by-night thing. You're getting people that have spent time and money on your work, which is amazing.
I'm assuming there's a website for the Fernandez books. Am I correct?
Yeah, alexsegura.com or polisbooks.com. You can find pretty much everything.
Cool. Okay. And here's another question is, have you, because, obviously so many Miami locales pop up in the books, have you set up any sort of walking tour for people that, where you might have the destinations mapped out on the website in terms of if people want to follow Pete's footsteps, they can do that? Yeah,
it's funny. I did, there's this website called The New Tropic that, was actually founded by a very dear friend of mine and 2 other friends of hers, and it's done amazingly well. It's kind of a culture and lifestyle website and newsletter. So you get a newsletter every morning, and it just kind of tells you, recaps the news for Miami and what's happening around the neighborhood, and it's, like a neighborhood email. And they did a walking tour, like Pete Fernandez's Miami.
That's great.
So it's like an interactive map, and I wrote little blurbs about different places. And what's funny about the Pete series is that while it tries very hard to be up to date, there are some places that no longer exist that I decided to take artistic license and give a new life to. There's bars or
Sure.
I figure if I'm writing the thing, I might as well.
It's your
include
ideal
places I want.
Yeah, it's your Miami ideal. Absolutely, man.
So, like in the opening pages of Down the Darkest Street, Pete kind of gets the tar beaten out of him at this place called the Gables Pub, and I used to hang out there probably more than I should have in college, and it closed shortly a few years later, and I just figured I'd bring it back, and there's a bunch of other places like that. So it's a fun little map, and now that you mention it, I actually should integrate it into my own website if that's even an option.
I hope so, man. No, that's great, because I really think that, one of the things that initially attracted me specifically to Parker was how he brought Boston and the Boston area alive. And,
right.
And then, of course, one of the other idiosyncrasies of the Spencer novels was Spencer was always cooking, always making something for his girlfriend. And you literally were in the kitchen with Spencer. And I know in old interviews, hearing Parker, radio hosts would ask him and say, God, when's the Spencer cookbook going to happen? He's like, I know. And in your case, given that you're such a music guy, I know that there's likely, if you don't have them on the website, playlists for Pete Fernandez, because there's always references to what might be playing in the background at whatever locale Pete might be at the moment.
It's funny you mentioned that. Music is such a huge part of my life, and also just as a listener and sometimes dabbler, but for Pete as well, he's always listening to music, and that's kind of his obsession or, hobby, I always thought it was neat to see more layers to the detective as opposed to just the day job or night job of solving the crime. So like Spencer with the cooking and the music for Pete, definitely. And I do make playlists as I write. They don't necessarily translate, meaning not every song that's on the playlist appears in the book, because that would just be cumbersome, but a few do. And there's this website called Large Hearted Boy that's a book and comic and music podcast website. And what they do is they bring authors to talk about their playlists. And so I've done that for Silent City and Down the Darkest Street, and I'll do it for the next one. But, I should send you the links to listen to the soundtracks, because it's really like music that evokes the mood of the story. And that's really fun. I don't really listen to music while writing, though.
I can appreciate that.
I find it super. Yeah, I find it so distracting, even if it's like without any vocals, because I just start to think about the song and like who played bass on this track, or which album is this from. You start getting into the weeds, and then that distracts you from the actual writing. But when thinking about the book, I do listen to a lot of different music and kind of weave together, and it helps. It helps get the inspiration going.
That's cool. Do you find yourself, without naming any specific sources, themes and lyrics of songs that can play out in a story?
There are just artists that I find that I go back to a lot. And, like Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground, Elvis Costello.
Yep.
I love David Byrne and the Talking Heads. Nico Case is great, and Wilco. And really, I think about it in terms of like music that explores the gray areas that aren't just kind of sappy love songs, but are also not just like dour and depressing. I've been listening to a lot of old 97s a lot, and
cool.
The Decemberists, things like that.
Sure. No, I'm fans with, I'd say, 90% of what you just laid out there.
Oh, good.
Please do send those links in. Send the walking tour link as well, because, I think that's a great idea for this post on wordballoon.com for the podcast and stuff, and let people immerse themselves in the world of Pete Fernandez. And you say you dabble in music. I do know that at times you've been in bands, and obviously that's a big part of or was a big part of your life. I don't know how much it is now, if the band still exists right now.
It's a matter. We talked earlier about hobbies becoming jobs, and now, so I work in comics by day, and I do write some comics, and I also do these novels, and kind of something had to give. And when I was in a band, one of our band members was moving to California, so it just became kind of the right time, and we were having a kid, so it was just one of these things where something had to move off the plate. But it's something I like to do. I like to play guitar. I like to play with other people, make music. And it's something I'll eventually get to again. And it's also it's just its own thing. I love doing it, and it's fun. And eventually I'll find a way to make some time, maybe just give up sleeping altogether.
Pretty cool, man. I also wanted to ask you about the crime novel podcasts that you would recommend, and not only ones that obviously had yourself, but ones. Do you listen to any crime podcasts like that?
I do. There's this podcast called Crime Writers On, and it was originally, I love the Serial podcast. The first season was really compelling.
Oh, yeah.
A couple years ago. And Crime Writers On started as Crime Writers on Serial. And so they would kind of recap and react to the episode, but eventually it became its own kind of quirky, engaging thing. They really it's these two crime writers, Rebecca Lavoie and Kevin Flynn, and two other local New Hampshire writers, and they just sit and chat about true crime and, any crime books that they're reading or crime TV shows that they're watching. It's really engaging, and it's almost more fun than the subject matter that they're talking about most of the time. It's entertainment unto itself. And they've plugged the Pete books a few times too, which is nice.
That's cool. That's excellent. What other crime podcasts have you done, or book podcasts?
There's a podcast called Criminal. My podcast listening has kind of taken a nosedive lately I've just gotten really tapped into audiobooks, but Criminal is a podcast that kind of takes weird and creepy crime stories, and basically, I don't want to say it's the NPR or, kind of that treatment, but they just do good reporting. They interview the people and kind of paint a picture, which is really nice. I'm blanking on the other ones, but there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of really, it's funny because when Serial hit, a bunch of Serial wannabes cropped up, and
yes,
the cream definitely rose to the top. There were a few where it was clearly like a journalist who had never done radio, but their bosses said we need a Serial podcast, and it didn't really resonate. But and it's A for effort. It's the content is good, but sometimes it's so hard to be charming and thoughtful and know how to pace a radio program. It's not something you just do overnight. You're not just reading a script, and you know this better than anyone.
Well, and not only that, but while I worked for my last radio job was with Hubbard Broadcasting, and their Washington, D.C. station was also a CBS affiliate, and one of their news guys did a true crime story that ended up being a two-parter on 48 Hours as well. And,
neat.
And they got a nice response, and clearly it was inspired by Serial. And he really pointed out, it's really tough to do this and then to do it well, and pointed out the time that it took to not only get all the facts right, but really, again, like you say, make it into entertaining radio versus even, an intensely written, transcript or some sort of print account of a very interesting case. So
it's a lot of work. You have to know the equipment, and it has to be well produced and not feel like someone's recording it from like a phone booth. There's another podcast called Sword and Scale that's true crime, but also he had some very, very high production values. It's not just about interviews. It's like weaving sound bites, and it's not overdone though. And it's the guy's based in Miami, which is funny. So we've chatted a few times, both being local, like crime people, but that's another good one that people should check out.
There are, I know, book clubs, and I know that some authors, obviously locally.
Oh wait, I completely blanked on one more. I've actually been a guest of this podcast. It's called Authors on the Air, and it's Pam Stack is the host. You guys would probably get along. She's a great, very engaged reader and very good interviewer. And we spoke about Silent City and Down the Darkest Street. And she just talks to one author every week, and she doesn't just do the top line stuff. She gets really into the book, and I'm amazed she can read everything every week. So she's great, and she's part of this whole network of different kind of crime podcasts.
Very cool.
And okay, now they're all coming to me. There's this other one called Writer Types.
Okay.
It just launched, and it features different authors being interviewed, crime authors, and they just did something about music and prose, and I actually had a little segment on there. So, there's a lot. I feel like there's an uptick, and it's not just because I remembered them all at once.
No, that's great. And honestly, I'm interested now because just like creator-owned comics, it's easier than ever, I think, to self-publish, and it seems like the author market is getting crowded, and it's hard to kind of stand out. And I know that you obviously have to be a lot more proactive in terms of promotion. So beyond podcasts and going to book conferences, I know some book clubs will obviously, invite a host, or rather invite an author to come on and meet with them. And I know some authors not only will do it locally, but also maybe do it like via Skype chat or something like that. And I was wondering how much you've played in that arena.
I've done the book club thing where I'll go to a book club in person and hear them discuss the book, and I've done library visits. I think those are really fulfilling because you're dealing with an audience that's already invested their time and they've read the book. So you're talking to people that have already kind of spent some time with your character, which is always fulfilling, beyond just like being on a panel and hoping that someone will eventually read your book. I haven't done the Skype thing as much. I've done it once or twice. Technology is always tricky with stuff like that, but it's another resource for authors to engage with readers, which I think is the most important part. Just once you get them hooked, and hopefully they're into what you're doing, then I feel like you have a reader for life as long as you keep, cranking out quality material.
Sure.
And you're right. Promotions are really hard. I think more and more you find that the author has to be on the front lines doing the plugging, and that's tough. I mean, as an author, I have the benefit of being a publicist by day, so I engage with people all the time, so it's not as strange for me to reach out to someone.
Sure.
But I think a lot of authors are really solitary people. They're kind of cranking away, and then suddenly they have to be extroverts, which is a hard shift to do.
Not only that, but also to be a marketer and be a marketer of their own product. So yeah, I can. You're right. I mean, I think much like a comic book artist, sometimes the writer is tucked away in his studio, and it's a very, singular kind of lifestyle, and it's hard to suddenly then be an extrovert for some people and really go out and promote their product. So I can appreciate
and then also to know, and then to also know what to do. It's such a everyone throws around the term of publicity, marketing, but promotions and like these interchangeable things. They're very different, and it's a career path unto itself. There are good publicists and there are not good publicists, and it's all about how you do it. Like writing. So to expect a writer to then be good at these other things that they might not ever do is a lot. It's a lot to ask.
Definitely. So what, as far as old timers, because you know me, we said a little bit of it at the beginning when we mentioned the Philip Marlowes and Sam Spade, so the Chandlers and the Hammets. So beyond the obvious, what are some? I know there's one, and I'll let you say it. One of your favorite old time but great kind of pulpy detective characters and writers.
Oh, I mean, I love Ross McDonald. I love the Lou Archer books.
Yeah.
I reread those, and we talked about this. I reread them while my wife was pregnant, leading up to the birth of my son, and it's like 20 books. So I don't know how I managed to find the time, but he just has a way of getting into the psyche of the villain. And I think of the early kind of pulp noir authors, he was the best at showing that the bad guys weren't bad. These are just people that are dealing with different things and different experiences, and there's a psyche there. It's not just like unnamed thug number 3. And his way with, he started off so much like a kind of pseudo Chandler, Marlowe and Archer seems a lot like Marlowe in the first few books, but then he kind of becomes his own thing, and that's when it really starts clicking on all cylinders. In terms of other early ones, Jim Thompson is great. Trying to think who else. We talked about Hammett and Chandler. He's not really, Lawrence Block is one of my favorites, and he's just been around for so long and has such a huge body of work. The Scudder books in particular.
Very cool. And I know we mentioned in our previous conversation John McDonald and Travis McGee.
Oh, yeah. I guess I forgot. No, the two McDonalds are essential, and John D. is a Florida guy, so...
Right.
Yeah, so his books are huge inspirations to anyone who chooses to write Florida crime. And Charles Willeford is great. He wrote a really great Miami series starring Hope Mosley in the late 70s, early 80s. That there is a little hat tip to the Hope Mosley books in the new Pete book. So I try to sprinkle one in each book, just kind of give a little nod to a book that was important to me. In Down the Darkest Street, I'm not really spoiling anything, but at some point he walks by a laundromat named Miami Purity, which is a nod to the laundromat in the novel Miami Purity. And you'll see there's a Hope Mosley nod in Dangerous Ends.
That's awesome. That's very funny. John, I know, and we talked about this. They keep trying to make a new Travis McGee movie, if they've ever. I think there might have been a television film at some point. But I don't, Yeah,
I think so. There were definitely a few Lou Archer movies. I think Paul Newman was in a few of them, but he was not Lou Archer. He was kind of like...
He was Harper. His character's name was Harper.
Yeah.
And the reason why was there was this Hollywood myth that Paul Newman movies that start with an H are more likely to be hits. I mean, there was Hall of Mirrors that was WUSA. And
weird.
Yeah, and Harper. And then so Harper and The Drowning Pool, I want to say, were the two... Isn't that the second one?
Yeah, and The Drowning Pool is one of the early Archer books, but It's also a really good one. That's kind of when the tide started to turn and he stopped being a Marlowe clone and really became his own thing. So
yeah, those are...
I think, I could be wrong.
Those are really good late 60s, early 70s Paul Newman films. And
I have to check those out. You're a movie buff, I'm guessing.
I am. And I was going to say, I think they're reasonably representative of the Ross McDonald stuff. So
yeah, I have to check those out. I watched Night Moves not long ago, that Gene Hackman movie that you would think it was just a classic novel. That was a great one. That's a great little PI flick.
Fantastic movie. I completely agree. And it's funny, it's sitting on my DVR because I haven't seen it in years. And I recorded it months ago. And yeah, like you said, I just noticed it was recently on, like in the last week or so on Turner. So
yeah, and it's got a Florida connection as well.
Yep. No, that's another fantastic early 70s thing. You ever see Laughing Policeman with Walter Matthau?
No, that's on the list. That's definitely on the list.
It's one of those Swedish crime, and I can't remember the original writer, but I'm also fascinated by European urban crime novels, and I think they have their own idiosyncrasies because of the cities that they were created in or where the detective is roaming around. But I do find that. Especially, again, at that same period of the 60s and 70s, to be equally interesting.
Yeah, I have to check that out. I don't know if you read the Henning Mankell books, like the Wallander books. Those were big influences on me, and just the way he has this really wasted kind of, he's not a PI, he's a police detective, but, he's just not taking care of himself. He's kind of very sharp, but also very flawed, and that to me really resonated. And he died not long ago, but the Wallander books are really up there for me, along with stuff like Pelicanos and Dead Hain.
I agree, and again, oh God, now I'm blanking. Kenneth Branagh. Kenneth Branagh did some decent adaptations of the Wallander books for British television.
I watched the first episode, and for whatever reason, it seemed to be run through almost like an Instagram filter. But I need to circle back to it because the content is so good.
Yeah, no, and I do think is it Dutch or is it German Wallander?
It's Dutch, yeah.
It is Dutch. Okay, yeah. I have seen the original German.
I think so. No, I
think
Scandinavian. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're right. I think it is Scandinavian. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So there we go. Ugly Americans once again.
Yeah. Whoops. Yeah.
But I'm a real sucker for exceptional crime fiction. And honestly, man, I think you're off to a hell of a start, man. 3 books in, and again, I think a series that people can pick up. And I guess technically they could start with Bad Blood and the novella if they wanted to get really the first story in air
starting
quotes.
point, and then you go into Silent City, and then you're off to the races. So it's almost like this is when things start to get really rolling. You have the problem with just having just one book is that somebody reads it and then they're kind of at a loss until you write the next one. But once you have a few under your belt, someone can really immerse themselves. And 3 books isn't a lot, but it's a meal as opposed to just an appetizer.
Oh, please, absolutely, man. And and then you got to learn to space them out because, God, I remember when Parker in particular was cranking out a Spencer every year. Obviously I hit it well into the series, so I had about at least a dozen, if not more, to go back and read.
But what a great feeling! Isn't that a great feeling when you dive in and you're like, I've got 10 to read.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm just really getting into Stephen King, where I have been for the last year and a half, and it's like the road has no ending. There's like 60 books to go through.
Very true. Now, do you? Because I don't remember the previous release dates. Do you have a specific month where you try to drop Pete? Because that was always the fun with Spencer. You always knew late or mid-spring that it was time for a new Spencer novel, and it was funny yearly to kind of anticipate that next book once I was caught up.
Yeah, it's always been April, or it's been April the last few times. So this year it'll be April 11th, and last year I think it was April 14th. So that seems to be the season, and it's good because then I can, as the draft is finished, I dive into the next one, and then I go back to the old draft and start, copy editing and fixing it up. So then when I get to the new draft, I'm fresh, and you kind of see it from different eyes. So now, as the 3rd book sets sail, I can go back to the draft of the 4th one and finish it and tweak it and rework it and hopefully have it ready in time for next year or whenever it'll come out.
That's excellent. So yes, April 11th right now, at least that's what Google is telling me is the date that Dangerous Ends drops. So there is plenty of time to catch up and start with like I said, Bad Blood, Silent City, and Down the Darkest. Help me.
Down the Darkest Street.
Down the Darkest Street. I was going to say.
Pre-order Dangerous Ends. Yeah.
That's excellent, man. No, congratulations. I really think this is great, and I'm so glad that your books are being well received. Well deserved, man. And I know your passion, and I'm glad that your hobby is becoming a viable profession. And I'm sorry, man, you're going to have to look for a new hobby because it looks like this stuff is here to stay. And, there's good opportunities for Alex Segura and Pete Fernandez in the future. So very nice, man.
Thanks, man. It's good. It's good when the things you like to do become things you have to do. So I don't have a lot to complain about. So thanks again for having me. This is always a treat to chat and catch up.
There you go, Alex Segura. And Pete Fernandez's latest novel, Down the Darkest Street, is out April 11th. So do yourself a favor and pre-order it now at your bookstore or at Amazon.com. Silent City and Bad Beat are a lot of fun, and I've been enjoying my Pete Fernandez reads, and I think you will as well. That'll do it for today's Word Balloon. Thanks so much for listening. Brought to you by, again, the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you very, very much, League, for your support. It really is appreciated. Patreon.com/wordballoon if you'd like to help the cause and subscribe to Word Balloon. Word Balloon is also brought to you by InStock Trades at InStockTrades.com, where, as I said before, I put crime in the search box, and I got things like Cloak and Dagger, Crime and Punishment, premium hardcover, featuring the writing of Bill Mantlo and Al Milgrom, The Art of Al Milgrom, also guys like Ed Hannigan, Ron Ferenz, Tony Salmons, Rick Leonardi, Kerry Gamble. This is good stuff, man, and classic Cloak and Dagger stuff, 42% off, $17.39. The Spectre, John Ostrander and Tom Mandrake's tremendous series from the 80s, featuring as much Detective Jim Corrigan as it did the Spectre himself. But this was really a great classic Spectre run of the 80s and 90s. You can get the first volume, 45% off, $10.99. They also have a series of the Shadow double novels, The Shadow, the Great Pulp Hero. Well, they've brought the pulp novels back. Anthony Tolan, the wonderful colorist for DC for so many years, is behind republishing the Shadow books, and also has amazing articles inside these collections as well. But this is the classic Street and Smith pulp book that started as a pulp, became a huge radio show. The pulp, or I guess the radio show slightly outlasted the pulp. And certainly Dynamite's been doing a great job bringing back the Shadow and has had excellent writers and artists on that series. But enjoy these Shadow double novels, usually 25% off and $11.21. You can also get the Crime Doesn't Pay City of Roses, written by Phil Stanford, artist Patrick Reynolds, and it's 42% off, just $11.49. Great deals are happening at InStockTrades.com. Check it out for yourself. When your orders are $50 or more, you'll receive free shipping from your friends at InStockTrades.com. Thanks for listening. John Suntress talking to you in just a couple days with another brand new episode for April to usher in the next month. And lots of great stuff coming in the days and weeks ahead for Word Balloon. C2E2 is just a couple weeks away. I will be there. I have no panels, but I will be, I always say at the conventions, I usually feel like I'm running for mayor because I shake a lot of hands. I hand out a lot of cards. I set up future conversations. This one's in my backyard, so it's going to be pretty easy to do. And if I run into you and you listen to the show, please give me the chance to thank you for listening to the show and supporting it, even just by listening. You know, Tripod, we're at the end of March, and that was a big campaign this month for all of the podcasts and stuff. And I'm seeing new listeners in the downloads, so it must be working. Thanks for spreading the word about Word Balloon. And also do it for your other favorite podcasts as well. Just because the month is ending, the sentiment shouldn't stop. And I hope you're sharing that information with your friends and letting them know about the podcasts you really like. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2017.